Today's program is called Bet the Farm, the dollars and cents of growing food in America. And we have Beth Hoffman with us. Beth Hoffman has reported on food and agriculture for 25 years, airing on NPR, publishing in The Guardian and Civil Eats, and blogging as the Hungry Hack for Forbes.com. Hoffman now raises grass-finished beef with her husband, John, on a 570-acre farm in Iowa. Her book, Bet the Farm, is a first-hand account of the perils of the modern American food system and an exploration of more just and sustainable ways of producing food. That's what we have.
Well, thank you. Sorry, there was a lot of confusion about the title of this talk. That's why Chastity is saying that. So, well, thank you for being here. Welcome. So, let's see. So this is the book, and you can find all of these books actually at the Performing Arts Center. We don't have them here, so Bill's and Sarah's as well. And there's a picture, this very fancy, dramatic British hunting type picture of my husband and I and our dog Snooks. And this is a photo of our cattle. We grass-finished beef, as you just heard, and we raise goats, and I'll talk a lot more about that, but I just wanted to give you a little picture about where we are. We're in south central Iowa. Land that was Fox and Sac and Meskwaki land. And I want to start with, just filling you in about the backstory of the book and how and why I came to write a book. So in 2007, I moved to Berkeley, California. I grew up on the East Coast. I was living in Utah for many years. I then moved there to go to grad school in 2007. And I walked out onto my back porch where it was like a 3-row, it was a row house with a back porch that was shared. And I was sitting out there on the porch, and my now husband, walked out and said, I was just in Iowa visiting my family's farm with my boys, and when they're grown, I'm going to be moving back there to take over the farm. And I didn't think much about it at the time, of course. I didn't know this man. But I also probably couldn't have accurately pointed out where Iowa was on a map. Like, that's how clueless about the Midwest I was. Didn't know anything about it. But we fell in love, and we spent summers on the farm. We came back every summer, swimming in the pond, building fence with his dad, chasing down cattle that had gotten out. And I started to build my own relationship with food, with this area. I mean, I was reporting on food and agriculture throughout this time, and went through kind of Berkeley School of Journalism, and then I was a fellow. I was a co-lecturer there, and I got to report in Africa. I got to report in India through all of this, so and throughout the U.S. So as the kids grew up, as they tend to do, it started getting closer and closer to this time of, maybe moving to this place where John wanted to be. I'm looking for my reading part here. And I have 3 different sections I was going to read. All right. So, it started getting closer, and we started to talk about moving out to Iowa to farm. John had grown up on the farm. He had moved to the Bay Area, San Francisco specifically, he went to culinary school. He then became a chef, a wine buyer, a butcher. So I was a journalist covering this, and so we had this enormous amount of knowledge about food by this point in time, and we really knew a lot about what we didn't want to do on the farm. We knew we really didn't want to be using chemicals. John had been in California during all of the 90s, where he had seen the rise of organic foods and sustainable food movement, and he just could see that there was a real there was a real niche for this, especially in a place like Iowa where no one was doing it. But I'll read from the book a little section here from the intro. But there were several huge roadblocks on the way to us moving to Iowa, aside from the inevitable culture shock I was to experience. The biggest problem was that someone was already running the farm. John's dad, Leroy, was officially the man in charge and had been for more than 50 years. Although Leroy was already 78 years old when John and I married in 2010, he was a spry 78, and he had no intention of simply turning the operation over to us. He had his justifiable doubts about whether I would ever really be persuaded to quit my job as a university professor and move to Iowa from San Francisco. And during John's absence from the farm for 30 years, Leroy had crafted his own plans for how the land was to be managed to support him in his old age. The corn and soybean cropland was rented out to a guy who sharecropped with him, and Leroy still took care of the herd of cattle himself, and he had no real intentions of retiring. It was far more likely he would meet his maker while sitting atop a tractor than lounging on the beach or playing golf. Even if he could be convinced that taking it easy was a better way to live out his golden years, I, for one, couldn't imagine a time when we would be able to make our own decisions about the farm without his input. And to add to the complexity of the situation, like many beginning farmers today, John and I were entering our 50s, and although John was strong and I was fit, it was clear we were no spring chickens. I also knew well enough from talking to farmers throughout the years that the physical work of farming was in many ways the easy part. The challenge actually comes from everything else required for success. Instead of a romantic life of growing tomatoes and raising happy cows, farm life is actually a job full of spreadsheets, receipts, and file folders. Making a living as a farmer in America requires a lot of business know-how, in addition to the computer time, phone calls, and networking. That's because although the stories we tell about farms fail to mention it, farming is first and foremost a business. Loving the land or working diligently day after day in the heat and cold only goes so far. To make the land your home and farming your career, it takes more than passion or even high yields. It takes money. So Leroy, like most farmers out there today, he didn't have a retirement fund. There was no 401k sitting in the background that he had been putting money into where he could just, leave us the farm and live happily ever after. And so we had to figure out a way for him to be able to make money off of us, basically, right? By paying a lease, or somebody had to be paying a lease in order for him to survive. And he was really, at the time, he was really worried we would not be able to pay, that we would fail, and that he in turn would lose the farm. And like, you heard just in Sarah's talk, during the 80s when John was saying, Dad, I want to farm, Dad, I want to farm, and he would just say, no, you don't want to farm. There's no money in this. Like, you need to leave, you need to go get a college education and go do something else, because this is not, we're not going to keep the farm with farming. So all of this like realization and being immersed in this, and then finally having the lease and realizing, okay, we sat down to do the spreadsheets with my mom, who's a CPA, and I was like, wait a minute, we're going to make how much? I'm going to leave my job, we're going to move to this rural location, and we're going to make what? And it felt like the first time, even though I had been reporting on this for so long, it was the first time that I felt like I really got it, that this was financially difficult year in and year out. The media makes it sound often like, oh, this year there's a drought. This year we have war with Ukraine. This year fertilizer prices are high. So therefore, farmers are struggling to make a living. And it's actually pervasive. Throughout the years of owning a farm, the prices are more often down than up. I talked to someone yesterday after my talk, and she said, yeah, we're one of those farms that receives huge subsidy checks. But as soon as that check arrives, it heads back out the door to pay for everything that we owe, because there's so much debt in farming. So these are our goats too, which I'll get to also. So, why is this important? Arguably, there's a lot of jobs that need to be paid more in this country. I was just talking about the book in a town, and I was talking to someone. We asked the bartender, how much are you making? And she told us $4 an hour. And I was like, holy, that needs to change, right? So lots of things that need attention in this country, but it's really an important thing, farming, because of all the impacts, right? Farming is not like the kind of profession that is in its own little bubble. It impacts everybody's life and the entire planet. And so I think it's important, if we want to solve the problems that are associated with farming, we've got to understand why people make the decisions they do on the farm. These two things need to be, we need to link them together. Because if I was to ask people who are non-farmers, right, what are issues in agriculture today, right? And if I was just to float that out there to people who don't have much relationship to it, they tell me things, in Iowa especially, erosion, that's a huge issue in agriculture, leading to water pollution, people in Des Moines not being able to drink the water because of pollution coming into the Raccoon River, pesticide drift, right? Nutrition, we would say what people are eating, the issues of obesity and diabetes and things like that in this country, directly tied to what we're growing and how we're producing food. Our vulnerable food supply chain. During the pandemic, this was really revealed, right? If we can't get food coming from far away, how are we going to feed ourselves? When I first set foot in Iowa on one of these trips to the farm, it immediately struck me. I was like, there's nothing in this state that anybody can eat. We're growing a whole state full of some of the most fertile land in the whole world. Nobody can eat anything that's coming out of the ground. And that's a problem. Or farm workers, exploitation of workers, on and on, right? We could go on and on and on with this kind of a list. But if we ask farmers what the issues are in farming and in agriculture, the list is really different. And I could see this as I was getting into this more and more, right? We often frame it, it sounds in the media as if farmers are often uneducated, brainwashed by agribusiness, whatever other, kind of derogatory thoughts, we'd have about why farmers do what they do. But they're often trying to deal with things just like financial stability year in and year out, right? How am I going to make a living? And how is that going to be guaranteed? You wouldn't be like a pencil manufacturer and produce millions of pencils without knowing where those pencils are probably likely to go. You would have some markets set up. You'd have some kind of guaranteed income. And that's what farmers are looking for. That question of where am I going to sell my goods? For how much? To whom? These seem like really simple problems, but in farming, they get to some of the real roots. Because especially if you want to do anything different with your land, like we did, these questions then are the key to it all, right? How am I going to sell vegetables in rural Iowa? Who am I selling them to? For how much? How do I get them there, right? All right, and the labor questions too. Not just the big immigration kind of questions out there, but the questions on a vegetable farm in particular, or with us, rotating cattle every day. That takes a lot more labor. So to do these things that are good for the land environmentally, they present other kinds of issues at the farm level. And for me, just being obsessed now with this question of future, Who's going to work this land in the future? I want to know that before I die. I don't want to just kind of set it up. It's going to have an easement. I'm going to do all these great things. And we're going to have prairie. We're going to have trees. And then good luck. Good luck taking care of it, whoever that's going to be, right? No, I want to actually be involved in that, because to me, that's the key to it. It's this regenerative agriculture, this term that we use all the time now. It's very vogue if you haven't heard of it. It's the in term in sustainable agriculture. But in the middle of that is generations, right? Regenerate. We need generations of people. So these are the questions that farmers are trying to answer every day. And so, with my book, then I tried to talk about, this thing comes in and out and in and out. Yeah, I'm trying to talk loudly. All right, so I tried to use my story to talk about the economics of agriculture, and the book is in many ways an explainer of just the way things work. And I've heard from lots of people now. The book's been out for almost a year as well. Just about, so many things people didn't understand. They've lived near a farm, they've lived in a town near farms, but they never really understood how it all kind of came together. So go back up here. All right, so this is an example, and this is a chapter that's about growing oats. And oats are sort of this thing that's discussed a lot because it's a great cover crop, and we can really impact the environment if more people were to grow things like oats. So I'll just start in. So when the only organic grower within a 100-mile radius told us he grows oats and sells them, we were thrilled. Before the other grasses and legumes grow tall enough, he told us, you can cut the oats and sell them as a grain. We could earn a sizable bit more than we would with just hay, making our bottom line for the farming season a lot less painful. Maybe both the hay and the oats wouldn't lose quite so much in our first year. It sounded too good to be true. Years earlier, I had been invited to a press day at a prominent energy bar producer's corporate headquarters. There, the owner of the company made an impassioned speech. Sitting in the company's small theater at the center of a facility that also boasted a farm-to-fork cafeteria, floor-to-ceiling glass windows, and a rock-climbing gym. The Fit Energy Bar inventor talked about the company's challenges in making 100% organic product. They could not source enough American-grown organic grains, such as oats, he told us, his voice strained with disappointment, even though his company would buy so much more if it were available. If we could just get the farmers to convert their fields to organic, he pleaded, the company, the farmers, and the earth would all benefit. Later that summer, I attended a field day at Iowa State University. There, a group of farmers, business people, and students stood in the pounding sun, wearing wide-brimmed hats and sunglasses, squinting at the fields before us. The researchers talked about their experiment. They were testing to see if growing organically would lower fertilizer runoff. I'm going to skip down. They found that using cover crops such as oats as a rotation in organic farming created soil that could absorb more nitrogen, which meant less leached into the ground below. The dots quickly connected in my brain. If farmers can grow cover crops like oats to improve the soil and the water, and they can also make more money by selling them to a company like the one I visited, isn't this a win-win for everyone? Shouldn't we all start growing oats right away? The researcher grimaced when I asked her why farmers don't sell to the disappointed owner in California. Those companies don't buy what we can grow in most of Iowa, she told me. Other farmers and grain distributors at the field day chimed in. Companies talk about how farmers in the United States don't grow enough organic grain, but the oats we can cultivate are too light for them to purchase. And I talk about what that means. Oats, it turns out, are not just oats. Much as steak is not the same steak quality as every other steak, And cheese is not cheese. How things are grown, where, when, all impact the final product, even the lowly oat. It goes on. We actually decided to grow oats. We got seeds because we were just wishful thinking, really, and we wanted to use the oats as a cover crop anyway. And I'll leave it there as a teaser. You have to read the book to see what happens. So how do we fix farming? That was one of the titles for this talk, so that's why it's here. And why read you this chapter about oats, really? So one of the things that I think is really critical in fixing those bigger problems, if we're to get to those issues of fixing things like water quality, immigration, all of nutrition, we have to also be addressing these problems on the farm at the same time. And a lot of times the discussion comes down to incentivizing payments, right? Like, oh, well, if we want to have cover crops, we got to incentivize it, we got to pay them another subsidy kind of payment, get them to do it. But ultimately, farmers want to grow food, right? We don't just really want, I have to believe, maybe it's not true, but I have to believe that why most farmers are in it is because they really want to be growing food, nourishing communities, all of these kinds of things. And for us to do that, we have to figure out all of these other parts of it. It's really, and especially for those of us who want to do something different, if we want more people to do regenerative agriculture, we want people to rotate cattle and put all this energy and labor in, we also have to connect all of those dots at the farm level of distribution, of marketing. Like, that's where we have to work on it in order to also help improve those bigger macro issues. Because we've ended up with many, many jobs, marketing and distribution, all of these things. So we need to understand what we're fixing first in order to fix something like farming, which I put it out there as a title to be provocative. And to create strategies that address both that farm level issues and these macro level issues like water pollution. And of course, to understand there's not a silver bullet in here. Everybody's constantly searching for if we just, I was at a place, I gave a presentation, and people just started, well, what policy changes? What should we grow? What, and I was trying to say it's about the framing of this as well. There's not going to be one thing. It's not just about everyone grow aronia berries, right? That's what we all want, that kind of solution. And it consistently kind of backfires on us. So what are we doing? So this is my husband, John. We had this professional photographer from the Noble Research Foundation actually came. And so this photographer took amazing photos for us. Again, we knew environmentally what we didn't want to do. We wanted to stay away from just the rat race. What we saw is people getting on that hamster wheel and not being able to get off, as John's mom explained to us. Buying seeds, buying chemicals, having to have the bigger combine, more land. So we didn't want to do that. Although I will say I don't think the answer is to say no one should do that. I'm not in that game. But we knew that we didn't want to. John's dad was a conventional corn and soy and cattle farmer. And so we decided to go this route. So we took out all the corn and beans. We planted it all in pasture and hay ground. And we started increasing our cattle herd and also making choices genetically, like bringing in different types of cattle so that they would finish on pasture. We move them every 2 to 3 days, thereabouts, every day sometimes. And this is a lot better for the land. There's really no argument, I don't think anybody would ever make, that this isn't a better system for the land. The land rests, the microbes get a chance to regenerate, the plants regenerate. No area gets just beaten up, whereas as you drive past a feedlot, you can see that the land is completely beaten up, right? So this is better for it, but it means that our cattle are on farm for 2 years instead of 9 months in a traditional cow-calf operation, which means we end up with 2 herds, which means we're moving 2 herds every 2 days. It's a lot more labor. And we also have goats. We actually will probably head more into having goats and less cattle. We just really enjoy the goats. They are Kikos. They're meat goats. They're super hardy. So people sometimes, if anybody's had a goat, sometimes people say, oh, it's so hard to keep them in. It's so hard. They need a house. These guys don't need a house. They're just out and about, and they eat all the things that you don't want on your farm. Honeysuckle, multiflora rose for us, just like all that invasive mid-level forest species that have taken over the farm. And we've also raised a huge amount of veggies in our farm. So, and interesting things, like we're growing things that, these are these canary melons that are amazing, the most amazing melon anybody's had. Cauliflower in these interesting colors, hordes of tomatoes and green beans. Which is to say, in a place like Iowa, probably in South Dakota as well, I don't know it as well, but we can be growing a lot of other things in this country. And I see this as a huge opportunity, really, because as the world is heating up, as we hear more and more fire and heat and drought in places like California, where 90% of our fruits and vegetables come from, to me, this feels like an opportunity for a place like Iowa to start heading into a real, truly more diversified landscape where we could have lots of different things going on the farms. But again, we have to make this local. To have local food, we have to be able to help with that food chain, the supply chain, getting food to customers. Because I'm on the Iowa Food Co-op board, and it's a kind of environment, all the farmers put in what they have in a computer database, and then shoppers shop in there, and then there's a day of the week that the food arrives. But the logistics are so piecemeal, and we have just such lack of investment that it's always like, refrigerate. We're just taking care of like the refrigeration. Oh, Joe can't drive this truck over here this day, and that becomes the entirety of what we're doing. So I see a lot of opportunity, really. So, so I really feel like there's these opportunities where we're not only pushing people maybe out of commodity farming, right? There's lots of reasons not to be growing commodities in the way, in my worldview, lots of reasons not to be doing the status quo. Things are getting more expensive, the prices are fluctuating wildly, but we also need those pulls into other things. So in the book, I look at kind of 4 different levels of how we can address this, which starts with the self, right? It's a really important part of the puzzle because farmers are often the ones that are perpetuating this, and the stress levels are so intense of people just really trying to make the bills at that moment, and you just get, like John's mom said, on that hamster wheel. That taking care of self is a really important part of this puzzle. So self farm level, kinds of changes we can make on the farm, the kinds of changes we can make as farm communities if we're growing the same thing, or lots of working with other vegetable farmers, for example. Or right now, there's a brand new company in Iowa called 99 Counties, which is they're purchasing pasture-raised meats from all over the state, 99 counties of Iowa, and marketing them in Chicago and big cities. So he was a rancher in Iowa. The idea came right out of conversations we were all having at the Practical Farmers of Iowa conference. We would meet, we all got together, we had a whole day, we talked about it. It kind of came organically out of that. And so now he is purchasing our beef at nice prices, totally talking with us all the way through about what do you all need, how is this going to, and hopefully that's going to just grow and grow. Again, bringing people into it, having pull factors into doing other things. Farm communities, national and international. So I guess I just wanted to tell, a story, one other story about kind of in that solutions, right? We visited a farm that is kind of well known in this regenerative agriculture world. It's called White Oak Pastures. It's in southern Georgia. Will Harris is the patriarch of this farm. And he's put a lot, he's not risk adverse at all. He's put a lot of risky moves into this farm. But we were sitting there, they do everything. They like to say now they have something like 10,000 living creatures on this farm. They have, every animal you can think of, vegetables. They have they process there. They send the hides out for tanning. They make purses. They make tallow candles. They have a cafe. There's cabins, And so we went and we were just completely overwhelmed, right? We're like, what, this isn't going to work for us. This is 30 years this has gone on, And one of the managers, we were at a meeting the last day, and he said this thing that just really resonated with us. He was making a comment about how the farm is run, and he said, in many farms you'll have $3 million worth of investment easily, and maybe 2 employees. On this farm, we have, and he was joking, he said $10,000 worth of equipment. Because I guess it's probably all broken down and they share it, whatever, the farm story. But let's say it's $10 million. They now have 169 full-time employees on this farm. Nowhere, Georgia. Rural blip on the highway. Nothing else going on. They're now talking about opening an elementary school. There's people moving there. There's people coming from the cities with skills that the farm didn't even know it needed, right? There's a woman who came as an intern from Manhattan. She worked in finance, loves the farm, and she's like, why don't I do data analysis for your processing facility? Yeah, that would be awesome, right? So she's a new employee, and and it just really struck us. Again, we're not going to be able to accomplish all of that. But what if we took the kind of investment that's out there that's fueling the JBSs of the world, the Tyson models, and we use that a little bit differently? I mean, there is a lot of potential for rural development at the same time as creating farms that can really nourish us and really nourish our communities. All right, I'm going to take some questions. Questions? Anyone? Comments, questions, ideas?
I'm curious,
Yeah.
I feel like when you said you sold your son beef to that connection you have, it seems like that would be like one of the most challenging things to, in terms of like a farmer selling direct rather than going to a processor, would be to just to network and find
Yes.
people to buy. I just wondered what your experience was.
Yeah, I mean, that is the root of what one of, the main problems is that whole connection with, well, how do I, well, okay, that's great, I want to do that, but how do I even start? And for us, we're pretty social. I have the book to talk about, and when I'm in Iowa, I hand around a little sign-up sheet, and people can write their emails and join, follow us on our blog, and so we've been able to do that, and we also really see what we do as offering kind of even the customer service that we can offer with John being a butcher is a whole different world. So what we do is we offer, we sell by sometimes eighths, but more quarter, half, whole animals. John will calls personally, goes over the cut sheets with people, makes sure that people know what the cuts are going to be. Said, okay, if you get it and you don't know what to do, just give me a call. I'll get you some recipes. And then we even go to the locker and pick it up and deliver it to you. So, we've kind of viewed the whole thing as, I want to make it as easy as possible for somebody to order. I once ordered we ordered a hog, and we split it with people, and it just was like, it was the most cumbersome process, where I had to, call the locker and deal with the locker and go pick it up, and then I had to divide it out between the different people, and I had to call the farmer and ask him how much we owed, and he's like, oh, I don't know, look on your cut sheet. And I was like, are you kidding me? That's not, you'd have to have such a specific type of customer who wants to deal with all of that, right? So, yes, it's the difficult part. And there hasn't been, as of yet, I used to cover food and technology, and there's a lot of people trying to do, an app where people can order. And in San Francisco, there was this tons of money poured into this company, Good Eggs, that it just was a struggle at the time to have people order that way. And then it also becomes difficult, like a butcher box and things like that, which are places that are serving people in this way, but where is that meat really coming from? I haven't met a farmer who's in that service. So those things have to link up. If those companies really want to make a difference, and like they say they do, that has to really be serving farmers at the same time, which would be great.
About that, like my family and friends of ours, like we do the same thing, but it just seems so easy on our end because it's just, let's flip out, we'll do this, but I don't think about it from the other end.
Yeah, and it's great that you do. I mean, I really feel like when people say, well, what can we do as consumers? It's a hugely cumbersome thing to try and think about every single thing you buy and where does it come from and how am I impacting the planet. But just pick one thing. I think meat is a really good one because there's such huge impacts of it. And, I just feel, I write a lot in the book about hog confinement, and not, a reporter interviewed me and he said, am I hearing empathy about hog confinement? I don't think I've ever read like an empathetic, sustainable food thing about hog confinement. And, I go into really a lot of detail in the book about why people make that choice. And I think there's really good reasons why farmers are choosing to do things like that. Because there's a contract that comes with it. There's guaranteed income. That's why people do it. And how much you're going to make. Even if it's just knowing how little you're going to make, it's pretty clear. But at the same time, if I don't want that to be the system, if I want a different kind of diversification to really be the solution to these problems, then I have to be purchasing through a different way, right? So if you oppose hog confinement, you can't then also be purchasing, most pork, I would say 100% of pork that you get at Costco is going to come from hog confinement. Those rotisserie chickens, right, are coming from Nebraska, I believe, is where that is centered now, the poultry facilities for Costco rotisserie chickens. So, yeah. Anyone else? All right, well, yes. Yeah.
As I say, so I feel like with like there's like CSAs in our area, and like when I see a lot of see more and more like social media channels for like the farm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it feels like, is that kind of the direction we're kind of going, or basically a farm really just needs to sell itself as a business? Is that kind of
Yeah, I mean, that would be an argument. Yeah, I mean, I talk a lot in the book also, there's a whole chapter about, CSAs and this idea, these researchers looked at CSAs and they found this concept of self-exploitation was like a really huge thing, especially in the CSA boxes, because if people don't know it, it's like community-supported agriculture. The concept was supposed to be that the consumer purchased a subscription at the beginning of the season. You'd say, okay, here's my $300 or whatever up front, and then you get a box each week. And you are supposed to be, the idea was, the relationship was that consumers were learning about what was happening on the farm and kind of weathering the storms with the farm. What's ended up happening is that the farms feel so much pressure to make sure the customer's happy that they then buy produce from somewhere else. If I lost all my cucumbers because of a pest, right, I go buy cucumbers from my neighbor to make sure that my box has the cucumbers. And then they start losing money. They often start giving too much produce. Right, so we've all had that experience. Anybody who's gotten a CSA box where you're like, holy zucchini, right? That's so much zucchini, I'm never going to be able to deal with all that. So they give too much away. So what they found in these studies is that farms that employed someone specifically to have that be their job, to do customer relations, to monitor what goes in the box, to make sure it was business, it was actually financially viable for the farm, that was their job. The farm did way better than the owner who just was giving, trying to keep the customer. So it's an important thing, I think, to think about as a consumer. Yes, where are my things coming from? Where's my food coming from? But also this idea of like, encouraging the farmers to talk about the farms in realistic ways and their lives. Because we get into that I talk a lot about these agrarian myths about, people posting on Instagram, oh, the beautiful farm life, and here I am with my beautiful children and my beautiful field. And it can be really detrimental if we have that image of it and we don't think, wow, this is a really hard job this person is doing, and I want to understand more about that. It makes the relationship really inauthentic, really. It's the farmers feel this pressure to just have a facade, really. When if you want to be involved, encourage them to really be honest about those difficulties. Anyway, I think we have time. Please get these books, Bill's and Sarah's and mine, at the Performing Arts Center, and thank you for coming. I appreciate it.